The high school gymnasium buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, its polished floor reflecting the glow of string lights, the air thick with the scent of cheap perfume and potluck casseroles. But I stood by the punch table, my hands smoothing my navy blouse, my graying chestnut hair pulled into a low bun, my brown eyes scanning a crowd that barely noticed me. At 65, I'd come to this high school reunion expecting to feel something: pride, nostalgia, connection. After 30 years as a librarian, cataloging lives through books. But instead, I was a shadow, my name tag reading Clara in faded ink, pinned to a life no one seemed to recall. Former classmates swapped stories of their careers and grandkids, their voices drowning out the old pop songs I'd suggested for the playlist, my table of curated yearbooks untouched, gathering dust like my memories. I'd spent weeks planning, digging up photos, calling old friends to make this night special, but they passed me by, their smiles quick, their eyes sliding to brighter faces. I'd given my life to stories, shelving novels, reading to children, helping my daughter Leela navigate her own. But tonight, I was just the woman who organized the punch bowl, my efforts as invisible as the faded banners overhead. I sipped my punch, its sweetness sharp, my smile tight, my heart heavy like the gym's old bleachers. I'd built a life for others, Leela, my late husband Daniel, my library patrons. But here, I felt like I'd cataloged myself into oblivion. I slipped to a corner, the linoleum cool under my flats, the air carrying a faint whiff of sweat and nostalgia from the gym's past. My fingers brushed the copper brooch Daniel gave me, its smooth curves a reminder of his voice. "You're my spark, Clara." He'd seen me, always. But without him, and with Leela's calls growing rare, I felt like the librarian who organized, the mother who waited, the widow who vanished. I'd shaped lives through books, but tonight, I was just the woman who set up the reunion no one truly attended for her. "You okay, Clara?" asked Mary, a former classmate, her hair dyed blonde, her smile polite as she paused mid-stride, clutching a wine glass. "I'm fine, just reminiscing," I said, my voice thin, forcing a nod. "It's a great turnout." "Nice job on the setup," she said, already turning away, her heels clicking. I smiled to the empty air, my throat tight, the punch glass cold in my hand. Nice Clara. Always fine, always there, never truly noticed. I stepped outside, the night air crisp, carrying the scent of cut grass and distant sage from the fields beyond town. The stars were sharp, unmuted by city lights, and I leaned against the gym's brick wall, its surface rough under my palm. I caught my reflection in a window, lined face, brown eyes, tired but sharp, a woman who'd given her heart to a world that moved on without her. I thought of my mother, her hands stitching quilts, her voice saying, "Find your own flame, Clara." I'd forgotten that, buried under years of shelving books and raising Leela. This reunion was meant to celebrate us, but it showed me how small I'd become. Not to them, but to myself. I walked to the edge of the parking lot, the gravel crunching under my flats, the air sharper with sage and dust from the fields beyond town. I thought of Daniel, how we'd stargaze in the backyard, his hand warm in mine, the night's quiet a comfort. I'd loved that stillness, but I'd stopped seeking it. Too busy with Leela's school projects, library budgets, widowhood's weight. Here, with the reunion's noise fading, I felt a spark, small but real. I wasn't enough to them, not to Mary, not to Leela, but I could be enough for me. I'd read about Sagebrush, a desert town hours away, with open skies and quiet streets. It was a whim, a whisper, but it felt like a call to start again. I returned to the gym, the string light's glow spilling out, but it wasn't my light anymore. I wasn't angry, just clear. I'd been waiting for them to see me, to give back the worth I'd poured into their lives. They hadn't, and maybe they wouldn't. I thought of my mother again, her voice steady. Go find your fire, Clara. I dimmed myself too long, shrinking to fit their needs. Now, with the stars above and the brooch cool against my chest, I felt ready to try. I didn't know what sagebrush held, but I was done being the unseen librarian, the forgotten mother. I was Clara, and I was ready to find her again. The kitchen was still, lit only by the soft glow of a ceiling light, its warm yellow casting shadows. Over a counter scattered with recipe cards and a faded photo of Daniel and me under a desert moon. The air carrying the faint scent of chamomile tea I'd brewed to calm my racing thoughts. At 65, I'd spent decades in this house, shelving books, raising Leela, loving Daniel. But last night's high school reunion, its chatter bypassing me, my yearbooks ignored, had left me feeling like a forgotten page, not a woman with a story. My graying chestnut hair was loose, brushing my shoulders, my brown eyes catching the light, and I wore a soft shawl over a cotton nightdress, its hem frayed from restless nights. I was ready to find Clara again, not just the librarian who organized, the mother who waited, the widow who faded. I opened a drawer, its wood creaking, and pulled out an old journal, its pages yellowed, filled with notes from my librarian days, book lists, storytime plans, dreams I'd jotted beside them. My throat tightened, remembering Daniel's voice, warm as he read my notes, saying, "You're my spark, Clara, lighting up the world." I'd been a spark, Leela's, my patrons, thinking love meant giving all of myself. But last night, standing by the punch table, I'd felt dim, like a star lost in city lights. I thought of my mother, her hands stitching quilts, her voice saying, "Keep a piece of you, Clara." I'd ignored her, too busy with library schedules and Leela's life. But now, with the reunion's echo, I wanted that piece back. I pulled a duffel bag from the closet, its canvas cool and rough, and packed carefully cardigans, skirts, the journal I hadn't written in since Daniel's death, each item a quiet promise. The act felt bold, like when I'd sneak away with Daniel to stargaze, his hand warm, the desert's silence vast. But this was for me, not him, not Leela, not my patrons. I'd read about Sagebrush, a desert town hours away, with wide skies and dusty trails. It was a name from a travel magazine, a memory of Daniel's stories, but it felt like a call, offering space to find Clara, the woman I'd buried under years of duty. "You're up late," Leela said from the hallway, her voice soft from sleep. She'd visited after the reunion, her concern a weight I both cherished and resisted. "I'm packing," I said, folding a scarf, my voice firm but gentle. "I'm going to Sagebrush." She frowned, stepping closer. "Mom, this is sudden. You sure you're okay?" I nodded, my smile small but steady. Her worry was kind, but it came too late, like a breeze after the heat had settled. She hugged me, brief and warm, then left, promising to call, leaving me with the duffel and my resolve. I sat at the kitchen table, the tea steam curling, the air cool with the scent of chamomile and old paper. I opened my journal, its pages blank but waiting, and wrote a single line. "I'm looking for me." The pen scratch was a quiet vow. I thought of Daniel, how he'd call me the desert spark for shining through quiet nights. I'd forgotten how to shine for myself, caught up in library work, Leela's milestones, widowhood's silent grief. But Sagebrush, with its promise of open skies and new dawns, felt like a place I could try. I walked to the window, the glass cool against my palm, the yard dark beyond. The stars were faint, dimmed by city lights, but steady, like Daniel's hand on mine years ago, saying, "You're brighter than you know, Clara." I smiled, thinking he was teasing, but now, with the duffel packed and the reunion sting fading, I believed him. I wasn't running away. I was running toward something, a life where I could be more than the librarian who organized, the mother who waited. I carried the duffel to my car, the driveway's gravel crunching under my slippers, the night air sharp with sage and dust. The engine hummed as I started it, a sound both familiar and thrilling. I thought of Leela, her distracted nod at the reunion, her life full without me. I loved her, always would, but I couldn't keep dimming for her. I'd call, I'd visit, but first, I needed to find myself, to see if Clara was still there under the years of giving. I drove into the night, the road open, the headlights cutting through the dark. The radio played softly, an old tune Daniel loved, and I hummed along, my voice rusty but mine. Sagebrush was hours away, a speck on the map, but it felt like a beginning. I didn't know what I'd find, maybe nothing, maybe everything, but I was ready to look. The stars grew brighter as the city faded, and I felt a spark, small but fierce, like I was waking up after a long, quiet sleep.
The sagebrush desert stretched vast before me, its sandy expanse dotted with cacti and sage, their sharp scents mingling with the dry heat. The sky, a brilliant blue broken only by the distant hum of a hawk's cry. At 65, I'd never ventured alone like this. And this desert town, with its dusty streets and low adobe buildings, felt like a new chapter, both daunting and alive with possibility. My graying chestnut hair was tucked under a wide sun hat, my brown eyes scanning the horizon, and I wore a light cardigan over a cotton blouse and slacks, my hands gripping a duffel bag, fingers stiff from the long drive. I'd left after my high school reunion left me unseen, and now in Sagebrush, I was searching for Clara, the woman I'd dimmed under decades of giving. I found my rental, a small adobe house with cracked clay walls and a flat roof, its wooden door warm under my touch. The key was under a potted cactus, and the door creaked as I opened it, revealing a simple room smelling of sun-baked earth and faint mesquite from a nearby fireplace. The furniture was modest, a woven chair, a sturdy table with a chipped edge, a bed with a colorful blanket. I set my duffel down, the tile floor cool under my flats, and ran my fingers along a windowsill, its clay smooth but gritty. This wasn't home, but it was a space to breathe, a place where I could be more than the librarian who organized, the mother who waited, the widow who faded. I walked into town, the dirt path crunching under my sandals, the air alive with the scent of dust and sage. The main street was quiet but vibrant, a market with colorful stalls, a diner with a neon sign, a small library with a faded open sign. I stopped at the market, its tables piled with woven baskets and turquoise jewelry, and bought a small notebook, its pages crisp under my fingers. I thought of Daniel, how he loved desert nights, pulling me to watch the stars, his voice warm. See the fire, Clara. It's yours. I'd stopped seeing fire after he died, too busy with Lila and my library. But now, with the desert's vastness around me, I wanted to try again. New to sagebrush? A voice asked. It was Rosa, a market vendor in her 60s, with dark eyes and a gray braid, her hands arranging pottery, her apron dusted with clay. Just arrived, I said, my voice hesitant, clutching the notebook. Looking for something new. Sagebrush has a way of showing you, she said, her smile gentle. It's patient like that. I nodded, her words settling like a cool breeze, and walked on, the town's hum soft behind me. I found a diner nearby, its windows streaked with dust, and ordered coffee, its warmth grounding as I sat at a counter, its surface worn but smooth. The air smelled of fried eggs and mesquite, and I opened my notebook, jotting a line about the desert's expanse. The pen scratched a quiet comfort, The town moved around me, vendors calling, a dog trotting by, and I felt out of place, my hat too neat, my hands too soft. But there was freedom in being unknown, no one expecting me to shelve books or plan Lila's life. Back at the adobe house, I sat on a small patio, the desert silence vast, the air cooling with the scent of sage and earth. The sky was turning pink, the stars just visible, and I thought of Lila, her distracted nod at the reunion, her life full without me. I'd left a note saying I'd call, but part of me wondered if she'd noticed I was gone. Here, though, with the desert's quiet embrace, I didn't need her eyes to feel alive. I was starting to see Clara not as the mother who gave, but as a woman who could dream. I opened my notebook again, the copper brooch from Daniel warm against my chest, its glint catching the fading light. I wrote about the market, its colors bold, Rosa's words echoing. It's patient like that. I thought of my mother, how she loved the desert, saying, "Find your flame, Clara, it's waiting." I wasn't sure I belonged here yet, but I was willing to try. The desert stretched wide before me, its silence alive, and I felt the spark. Small, but real. I was afraid, but I was in sagebrush, and that was enough for now.
The sagebrush sky burned with dawn's orange glow, its vast expanse stretching over dunes and cacti, their shadows sharp against the sand, the air crisp with the scent of sage and the faint sweetness of blooming desert marigolds. At 65, I'd been in this desert town for a week, and its quiet rhythm, the hum of distant coyotes, the rustle of tumbleweeds, was kindling a warmth I hadn't felt since Daniel's days. My graying chestnut hair was loose, brushing my neck, my brown eyes tracing the horizon, and I wore a light cardigan over a cotton blouse and slacks, my hands holding my notebook, its pages now flecked with notes about the desert. I'd come to Sagebrush after my high school reunion left me invisible, and now, with the desert's calm, I was finding small joys to claim as Clara, not just the librarian who gave everything. I stopped by a cluster of smooth stones, their surfaces warm from the rising sun, and sat on a wooden bench, its planks weathered by heat and wind. I opened my notebook, jotting lines about the dune's curves, the pen scratch blending with the desert's soft hum. The act felt like reclaiming a piece of me, a way to see through my eyes, not Leela's needs or my patron's requests. I thought of Daniel, how we'd watch desert sunrises, his laugh warm as he'd say, "Find the spark, Clara, it's everywhere." I'd stopped looking for sparks after he died, too busy shelving books and parenting. But now, with the desert's rhythm in my heart, I felt them again, faint but alive. I wandered into town, the dirt path warm under my sandals, the air carrying the rich scent of fresh tortillas from a market stall. I stopped there, its canopy flapping gently, and bought a warm tortilla, its earthy flavor grounding me as I bit into it. The stall's table was rough under my fingers, and I wrote a note about the market's colors, its vibrancy like the desert's pulse. The simplicity of it, the tortilla, the notebook, the morning's quiet, felt like a gift, a way to choose joy for myself, not just serve it to others. I thought of my mother, her hands stitching quilts, her voice saying, "Hold the bright things, Clara. They're yours." I was holding them now, small but vivid, like stones in the sand. "You're settling in," Rosa said, the market vendor, her gray braids swinging as she arranged clay pots, her smile warm. She sat beside me, her hands dusted with clay. "Trying to," I said, showing her my notebook, my voice lighter than I expected. "Sagebrush feels open." "The desert gives you space," she said, her eyes crinkling. "It knows how to listen."
Her words settled like a soft breeze, and I nodded, grateful for her warmth. I spent the afternoon exploring, the town revealing itself in quiet wonders. A hawk circling above, the scent of mesquite from a diner's grill, the desert's steady pulse. I stopped by a trail lined with cacti, their spines glinting in the sun. I leaned against a wooden post, its surface rough under my palms, and watched the dunes shift, their shapes fluid yet constant. I thought of Leela, her distracted nod at the reunion, her life moving on. I'd left a note and she hadn't called yet. But here, with the desert's rhythm, I didn't need her eyes to feel real. I was starting to see Clara, the woman who wrote, who tasted tortillas, who walked alone and felt alive. Back at the adobe house, I sat on the patio, the desert silence vast, the air cooling with the scent of sage and earth. I opened my notebook and wrote about the trail, its cacti fierce yet beautiful, like the woman I was becoming. I noted Rose's words, the tortilla's warmth, the desert's quiet, each a step toward claiming this place. I thought of Daniel again, how he'd loved my quiet moments, calling them my desert spark glow. I thought my glow was in giving, but now I saw it could be this, choosing to notice, to write, to keep something for myself. The stars came out, sharp against the dark, and I stayed on the patio, the blanket from the house around my shoulders. Sagebrush wasn't home yet, but it was a place where I could grow, where I could find joy in small things, a notebook, a tortilla, a kind word. I wasn't whole, but I was closer, and that was enough for now. The desert hummed its gentle song, its silence alive, and I smiled, my pen still in hand, ready for whatever came next.
The sagebrush market buzzed softly under a midday sun, its stalls vibrant with woven rugs and polished stones, the air thick with the scent of roasted chilies and the faint tang of desert dust. A guitar's strum drifting from a nearby corner. At 65, I'd been in this desert town for 2 weeks, and its rhythm, the hawk's cry, the market's hum, was weaving itself into me, kindling a sense of belonging I hadn't felt since Daniel's days. My graying chestnut hair was tied back with a scarf, my brown eyes catching the sunlight, and I wore a light cardigan over a cotton blouse and slacks, my hands holding my notebook, its pages now lined with desert notes. I'd come to Sagebrush after my high school reunion left me unseen, and now, with the desert's warmth and new faces, I was finding not just joy but connection, a place for Clara to grow. I walked to a pottery stall, its clay pots warm under my fingers, the air carrying the earthy scent of baked earth. Rosa, the vendor, had become a steady presence, her stall a daily stop, her kindness easing me open. I bought a small turquoise pendant, its weight grounding in my palm, and sat at a bench, noting the market's colors in my notebook. The act was becoming a ritual, a way to claim Sagebrush as mine, not as the librarian who shelved or the mother who planned, but as Clara, who could belong. I wandered to a shaded plaza where locals gathered, their voices mingling with the guitar's melody. There, I met Javier, a retired mechanic in his late 60s, his face lined like desert stone, his laugh soft as he carved wooden figurines, his denim shirt dusted with sawdust. I paused, drawn to his quiet focus, and wrote about his hands, their lines like the desert's dunes. I thought of Daniel, how he loved watching artisans, saying, "They know the desert's pulse, Clara." I'd stopped seeking pulses after he died, too busy with Leela and my library. But now, with Javier's steady carving and the desert's hum, I felt them stirring again. "Got away with words," Javier said, nodding at my notebook,
his voice low, his eyes kind under a straw hat. "Just trying," I said, my voice shy but warm, showing him the page. "It's new for me." "New keeps you alive," he said, his smile crinkling his face. "Keep writing." His words landed softly, like a pebble in the sand, and I smiled, feeling seen in a way I hadn't at the reunion. Rosa joined us later, her apron swapped for a shawl, and we sat under a mesquite tree, its shade cool, the air carrying the scent of chilies and dust. They shared stories, her pottery's history, his years fixing cars, and I listened, my notebook open, feeling a spark of belonging. I told them about the reunion, how my yearbook sat untouched, my voice steady but tinged with old hurt. They nodded, their eyes gentle, not judging, but understanding, and I felt a weight lift, like I wasn't just the librarian who organized or the mother who waited, but someone who could be known. I walked back to the adobe house, the sun high, the air warm with the scent of sage and earth. The town was alive, vendors laughing, a child chasing a dog, and I felt part of it, not just a visitor. I thought of Leela, how she'd called yesterday, her voice brief, asking if I was okay. I'd said yes, but I hadn't told her how sagebrush was awakening me, how Rosa's smile and Javier's quiet wisdom were showing me I could be more than the librarian, the mother, the widow. I'd spent years giving my spark to others, thinking it was enough, but here, with new faces, I was learning to shine for myself. Back at the house, I sat on the patio, the desert silence vast, the air cooling with the scent of sage and mesquite. I opened my notebook and wrote about Javier's hands, Rosa's warmth, the way the desert felt like a friend. I thought of my mother, her voice saying, "Find your people, Clara. They'll hold you." I was finding them now, in sagebrush's small moments, in the kindness of strangers who saw me, not for what I did, but for who I was. The stars came out, bright against the dark, and I stayed on the patio, the blanket around my shoulders. Sagebrush was becoming a home, not just a place. And these people, Rosa, Javier, were its heartbeat. I wasn't whole yet, but I was closer, my heart lighter. As Javier said, the desert hummed its steady song, and I smiled, my pen still in hand, ready for whatever came next.
The sagebrush adobe house was dim under a stormy sky, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and the sharp tang of an old postcard I'd found tucked in my journal, its edges curled, addressed to me in Mary's looping handwriting from years ago. Thunder rumbled outside, rain pattering on the clay roof, and I sat at the chipped wooden cable, a single lamp casting a soft glow over the postcard, its ink faded but clear. At 65, I'd been in this desert town for 3 weeks, finding light in Rosa's kindness, Javier's wisdom, and my notebook. But this postcard from Mary, my high school friend, written decades ago and never sent, stirred a pain I'd buried since Daniel's death. My graying chestnut hair was loose, my brown eyes misty, and I wore a soft cardigan over a cotton dress, the copper brooch from Daniel warm against my chest, my fingers trembling as I held the card. The postcard was brief, raw, written when Mary and I drifted apart after high school, her words heavy with hurt. She'd felt I'd chosen my library work over our friendship, leaving her behind when she needed me most. My throat tightened, remembering her calls I'd let go to voicemail, too busy with Leela's school plays and library deadlines. I thought I was being strong, organizing story times, keeping Daniel's memory alive, but Mary had seen absence, a friend who shone for others but dimmed for her. The reunion, with its ignored yearbooks, had shown me I'd faded, and now, with this postcard's weight, I saw I'd lost not just myself, but a friend too. I thought of Daniel, how he'd nudge me to call Mary, saying, She needs your spark, Clara. I tried, but I'd buried my own spark too busy giving to others. I stood, the chair creaking on the tile floor, and walked to the window, the glass cool and streaked with rain. The desert churned beyond, its dunes blurred by the storm, mirroring the ache in my chest. I'd poured myself out, shelving books, raising Leela alone, loving Daniel, thinking it was love, but it had left me hollow, a lantern with no flame. The postcard reminded me of the Clara I'd been, laughing with Mary over milkshakes, dreaming under desert stars, but also of the years I'd spent as the widow who grieved alone, the friend who gave but didn't connect. Sagebrush was helping me find myself, but this postcard was a gust, dragging me back to old regrets. "You okay in this storm?" Javier called, his voice muffled through the door, his jacket dripping as he stood on the patio, his weathered face kind under a wet hat. He'd stopped by to check on me, his presence steady like the desert's dunes. "It's stirring old things," I said, holding the postcard, my voice thin against the rain's patter. "From a friend." He nodded, his eyes gentle. "The desert digs up what's buried. Let it rest." His words were simple, like a cactus in bloom, and I smiled faintly as he left, promising tea tomorrow. I sat again, the lamp's light soft, and held the postcard, its words a bittersweet mirror. I thought of the reunion, how I'd felt invisible, and Leela's brief call, her voice distant. I'd given Mary everything, thinking it was friendship, but the postcard showed I'd given myself away too, even to her who needed me most. Sagebrush, Rosa's warmth, Javier's quiet wisdom, and my notes were teaching me I could be more than duty. I wasn't erasing Daniel or Mary, but I was learning to carry them differently, to make room for Clara, the friend, the woman who could still shine. I opened my notebook, the storm's rumble softening, and wrote about the desert's wild dunes, the pen's lines jagged but honest. The act felt like a bridge, linking my past to this moment, regret to hope. I thought of Mary again, how we'd dance under the stars, her laugh bright, my voice saying, "You're enough, Clara, just you." I thought my worth was in giving, but now I saw it could be in remembering, in reaching out. I wasn't ready to call her yet, but the thought felt closer, like a star through the clouds. The rain slowed, the air cooler now, carrying the scent of wet sage and earth. I stepped onto the patio, the blanket around my shoulders, the desert's rhythm steady despite the storm. Sagebrush wasn't a cure, but it was a place where I could face my ghosts and still find light. Rosa's smile, Javier's kindness, and my own words in my notebook. I wasn't free of the past, but I was stronger, ready to keep going, to find the woman I was meant to be.
The sagebrush trail wound through dunes, their curves dusted with sand, the air sharp with the scent of sage and the faint sweetness of blooming creosote, the sun warm on my bare arms. At 65, I'd been in this desert town for a month, finding light in Rosa's warmth, Javier's wisdom, and my notebook. But Mary's old postcard, unearthed last night, had stirred me to look deeper, to uncover the Clara I'd lost under years of giving. My graying chestnut hair was tied back with a scarf, my brown eyes tracing the desert's expanse, and I wore a light cardigan over a cotton blouse and slacks, my hands holding my notebook, its pages now thick with words. The high school reunion had shown me I'd faded, and now, with the desert's steady pulse, I was peeling back layers of sacrifice to find who remained. I sat on a flat rock overlooking a canyon, its surface rough and warm, and opened my notebook, writing about the dune's shapes, the pen's scratch blending with the desert's soft hum. The act was a mirror, showing me a woman who'd poured herself into others, shelving books, cooking for Leela, loving Daniel, thinking it was love, but losing herself in the process. Mary's postcard, raw with her hurt, reminded me of the Clara I'd been, dancing with her under desert stars, dreaming big, but also of the years I'd buried her under library schedules, family dinners, and grief, becoming the steady one who never asked for more. I thought of Daniel, his hand on mine by a campfire, saying, "You're my desert flame, Clara. Don't let it dim." I'd nodded, but I'd measured my worth by others' needs, and Sagebrush was showing me that wasn't enough. I walked into town, the dirt path warm under my sandals, the air carrying the faint scent of roasted corn from a street vendor. The main street hummed softly, locals chatting, a truck rumbling by, and I stopped at Rose's pottery stall, its clay pots glinting in the sun. She'd become a friend, her kindness an anchor, and I bought a small clay bowl, its texture solid in my hand, a small claim to this new life. I thought of the reunion, how my yearbook sat untouched, my years reduced to a quick, "nice job." I'd been invisible there. But here, with Rosa's nod and Javier's wave from his carving bench, I was starting to shine again, not for them, but for me. "You seem thoughtful today," Rosa said, arranging pots, her gray braids swinging, her eyes sharp but kind. "Digging through old things," I said, my voice soft, showing her my notebook, "trying to find me." "The desert's good for finding," she said, her smile warm. "It shows you what's real." Her words settled like a soft wind, and I nodded, carrying the bowl back to my adobe house. I sat on the patio, the desert silence vast, the air cooling with the scent of sage and mesquite. I opened my notebook and wrote about the canyon, its depth like the woman I was uncovering. I noted Mary's postcard, Rosa's words, the way the desert felt like a guide, leading me to question who I'd been. I'd spent decades being the anchor, organizing story times, raising Leela alone after Daniel, grieving quietly, thinking it was strength. But strength wasn't just giving, it was claiming myself too. Sagebrush with its dunes and kind faces was showing me I could be Clara, not just the roles I'd worn. I thought of Leela, her brief calls, her voice polite but distant, and the reunion where my efforts were ignored. I'd poured my light into her, expecting it to reflect back, but it hadn't. The postcard was a mirror, showing me the woman I'd been, laughing with Mary, planning adventures, and the one I'd become, dimmed by duty. I wasn't angry, not anymore. It was quieter, a resolve to find the Clara who could shine without needing others' eyes. Sagebrush with its dunes and kind faces were showing me I could be Clara, not just the roles I'd worn. I walked to the canyon's edge, the sand soft under my feet, the dunes glowing in the evening light. I thought of my mother again, how she'd sit by a campfire saying, "Your heart's wide, Clara, but save some for you." I was saving it now, in these moments, writing, noticing the creosote, talking with friends. Sagebrush wasn't a cure, but it was a place to grow, to ask who I was when I wasn't giving. I wasn't whole yet, but I was closer, each word a step, each dune a whisper of truth. The stars began to show, sharp against the twilight, and I stayed on the patio, the blanket around my shoulders. I opened my notebook again, the brooch from Daniel glinting, and wrote, "I'm finding her." The words felt like a promise, small but fierce. The desert hummed its endless song, and I smiled, ready to keep digging, to claim the woman I was meant to be.
The Sagebrush Community Center hummed with the earthy scent of wet clay and the faint tang of mineral water, its adobe walls absorbing the midday sun, casting a warm glow on wooden tables strewn with pottery tools. At 65, I'd been in this desert town for 5 weeks, finding myself through Rosa's kindness, Javier's wisdom, and my notebook. But Mary's postcard had pushed me to seek more, to claim my voice in a new way. My graying chestnut hair was tied back with a scarf, my brown eyes focused, and I wore a cotton blouse under a light cardigan, its sleeves dusted with clay as I stood before a potter's wheel, hands shaping a lump of damp earth. The high school reunion had shown me I'd faded, and now, joining this pottery class, I was crafting not just clay, but courage, shaping Clara into someone who could create. The clay was cool and slick under my fingers, the wheels hum blending with the desert's distant pulse as I tried to form a simple bowl, its edges wobbly but honest. The act felt like my notebook, a way to say I was here, not just the librarian who organized or the mother who gave, but Clara who could make something new. I thought of Daniel, how he loved my little projects, saying, "Your hands weave stories, Clara." I'd stopped weaving after he died, too busy with Leela's needs, library schedules. But here, with the clay's smooth weight, I was finding those stories again. I thought of my mother, her hands stitching quilts, her voice saying, "Make something yours, Clara." This bowl, imperfect but mine, was a start. The class was small, a handful of locals chatting over their wheels, their hands shaping vases and mugs. Rosa had mentioned it, her eyes bright, and I'd signed up, nervous but eager. I glanced around, seeing their creations, rough, beautiful, alive, and felt a spark of belonging, not just to Sagebrush, but to myself. I thought of the reunion, how my yearbook sat untouched, my years reduced to a quick, nice job. I'd been invisible there. But here, with clay on my fingers and the desert's hum outside, I was visible, not to others, but to me. "Coming along nicely," said Elena, the instructor, a woman in her 60s with short black hair and a warm laugh, her apron streaked with clay. She leaned over my wheel, her hands steady. "It's uneven," I said, half laughing, my voice lighter, wiping clay from my hands. "It's a story," she said, her eyes kind. "That's where it begins." Her words settled like a desert breeze, and I nodded, my hands moving again, feeling bolder. After class, I walked to a nearby trail, the sand soft under my sandals, the air carrying the scent of sage and creosote. The dunes glowed under the afternoon sun, and I carried my bowl, still soft, wrapped in cloth. I sat on a smooth rock, its surface warm, and opened my notebook, writing about the clay's feel, its willingness to bend. I thought of Daniel, how he loved my little project, saying, "Your hands weave stories, Clara." I'd stopped weaving after he died, too busy with Leela's needs, library schedules. But here, with the clay's smooth weight, I was finding those stories again. I thought of my mother, her hands stitching quilts, her voice saying, "Make something yours, Clara." This bowl, imperfect but mine, was a start. The class was small, a handful of locals chatting over their wheels, their hands shaping vases and mugs. Rosa had mentioned it, her eyes bright, and I'd signed up, nervous but eager. I glanced around, seeing their creations, rough, beautiful, alive, and felt a spark of belonging, not just to Sagebrush, but to myself.
I thought of the reunion, how my yearbook sat untouched, my years reduced to a quick, nice job. I'd been invisible there, but here, with clay on my fingers and the desert's hum outside, I was visible, not to others, but to me. "Coming along nicely," said Elena, the instructor, a woman in her 60s with short black hair and a warm laugh, her apron streaked with clay. She leaned over my wheel, her hands steady. "It's uneven," I said, half laughing, my voice lighter, wiping clay from my hands. "It's a story," she said, her eyes kind. "That's where it begins." Her words settled like a desert breeze, and I nodded, my hands moving again, feeling bolder. After class, I walked to a nearby trail, the sand soft under my sandals, the air carrying the scent of sage and creosote. The dunes glowed under the afternoon sun, and I carried my bowl, still soft, wrapped in cloth. I sat on a smooth rock, its surface warm, and opened my notebook, writing about the clay's feel, its willingness to bend. I thought of Daniel, how he loved my little project, saying, "Your hands weave stories, Clara." I'd stopped weaving after he died, too busy with Leela's needs, library schedules. But here, with the clay's smooth weight, I was finding those stories again. I thought of my mother, her hands stitching quilts, her voice saying, "Make something yours, Clara." This bowl, imperfect but mine, was a start. The class was more than pottery. It was a canvas with Rose's warmth, Javier's wisdom, and this class weaving me into it. I wasn't whole yet, but I was closer. Each creation a step toward the woman I was meant to be. The desert hummed its endless song, and I smiled, ready to keep shaping, to claim my light. The Sagebrush Diner glowed with the warm flicker of neon signs, their buzz mingling with the clink of coffee mugs, the air rich with the scent of fried eggs and roasted chilies, blending with the faint dust of the desert outside. At 65, I'd been in this desert town for 6 weeks, finding myself through Rose's kindness, Javier's wisdom, my pottery, and the notebook now heavy with my words. But today, Mary was coming to visit. Our first meeting since the high school reunion left me unseen. My green chestnut hair was tied back with a scarf, my brown eyes nervous but hopeful, and I wore a light cardigan over a cotton dress, my hands fidgeting with the copper brooch from Daniel, its smooth curves grounding me. The reunion had shown me I'd faded, and Sagebrush had helped me shine, but facing Mary meant mending a friendship strained by my giving and our distance. I sipped my coffee, its warmth steadying me, and looked out the window where the desert stretched under a gray sky, its dunes soft but restless. Mary's postcard, found in my journal, had laid bare her hurt, how I'd chosen my library work over our friendship, leaving her alone in her struggles. I thought I was being strong, shelving books, keeping Leela's life steady, but I'd lost her in my rush to be everything. The reunion, with its ignored yearbooks, echoed that loss. And now, with the sagebrush's rhythm in my heart, I wanted to rebuild, not as the friend who gave, but as Clara, who could connect honestly. The diner door creaked, and Mary stepped in, her dark hair now silver, her coat dusted with sand, her hazel eyes scanning until they met mine. She was 64, her face lined but familiar, her smile cautious, like she wasn't sure who I'd become. I stood, my heart quick, and we hugged, her coat rough against my arms. We sat, the table small between us, and I felt the weight of years, our milkshake nights, my library years, our silence after Daniel's death, heavy. but unspoken. You look different, Mary said, her voice soft, stirring her tea, her eyes on the mug. Sagebrush is changing me, I said, my voice steady but warm, touching the brooch. I needed to find myself. She nodded, her smile faint. I wish you'd known you felt so gone. Her words stung, but they were honest, and I leaned forward, ready to meet her halfway. We talked, slowly at first, the diner's hum a gentle backdrop. I told her about the reunion, how I'd felt invisible, my yearbooks untouched, my voice calm but raw. She listened, her eyes wide, and shared her own hurt, how my focus on work felt like distance, how she'd grieved her own losses alone. I thought of Daniel, how he'd sit with us by a campfire, saying, "Friendship means showing up, Clara." I'd held too tightly to my role as provider, thinking it was enough. But here, with the desert's pulse outside, I saw I could love Mary differently, as equals, as friends. We laughed, a soft sound over memories of dancing under stars, and cried when we spoke of our losses, our silence a shared ache. I showed her my notebook, its pages filled with desert notes and pottery sketches, each a piece of the Clara I was finding. She traced the line about the dunes, her smile small but real, and told me about her life, her career, her quiet struggles, her regret for pulling away. The diner grew quieter, the air cooler now, carrying the scent of rain and coffee, and I felt a bridge forming, fragile but strong, like the brooch's curves. I wasn't erasing the years apart, but I was building something new, with Mary, with myself. We walked to a nearby trail, the sand damp under our shoes, the dunes glowing in the dusk. I thought of the reunion, how I'd waited for others to see me, and Leela's distant calls. I'd given too much, expecting Mary to fill the space Daniel left, but Sagebrush had taught me I could fill it myself through pottery, writing, friends. Mary wasn't my light, but she was my friend, and I loved her enough to let her be, to meet her as Clara, not just the giver. Back at the adobe house, we sat on the patio, the desert's murmur steady, the air rich with sage and earth. I gave her a small clay bowl, its edges uneven but warm, and she held it, her eyes soft. I thought of Daniel again, how he loved our desert talks, calling them our spark moments. I was making new moments now, with Mary, with myself. Sagebrush wasn't a cure, but it was a place to mend, to build bridges, to shine.
The sagebrush desert glowed under a late afternoon sun, its dunes shimmering with golden light, their curves soft against the vast sky. The air sharp with the scent of sage in the faint sweetness of blooming creosote, a distant coyote's howl weaving through the quiet. At 65, I'd been in this desert town for 2 months, weaving a new life through Rosa's warmth, Javier's wisdom, my pottery, and the mended bond with Mary, whose visit yesterday had left me lighter, whole in a way I hadn't expected. My graying chestnut hair was loose, catching the breeze, my brown eyes bright with peace, and I wore a cotton dress under a light cardigan, my hands holding a small clay bowl, its smooth curves warm from the kiln. The high school reunion had shown me I'd faded, but Sagebrush had helped me claim my light, shining as Clara, a woman who chose herself. I walked along a trail, the sand soft beneath my bare feet, the desert's rhythm steady and soothing. I stopped by a shallow canyon, its walls etched with time, reflecting cacti and sky, and knelt, setting the clay bowl against a smooth stone, its turquoise glaze vivid in the sunlight. It was a gift to the desert,
a way to say I was here, not just surviving, but thriving. I thought of Daniel, his voice calling me his desert flame, and how I had lost that flame, giving willowing too much to Lila, my library, and my grief. Sagebrush had given it back through Rosa's smile, Javier's stories, Mary's laughter, my notebook, and pottery. I'd come here unsure, but now with the desert's gentle hum, I stood steady, my roots deep in this quiet town. I thought of my mother, how we'd sat by a campfire, her voice saying, "You're enough, Clara, just you." I'd bloomed here in Sagebrush's small moments, riding dunes, eating tortillas, shaping clay with Elena. The reunion, with its ignored yearbooks, felt like a distant echo, its stings softened by this place. I'd been invisible there, but here, with clay on my fingers and the desert song in my ears, I was seen, not just by others, but by myself. I wasn't perfect, but I was whole, and that was enough. "You're radiant today," Rosa said, joining me, her gray braid loose, her shawl fluttering, her smile warm as she walked from her stall. "Feeling it," I said, my voice steady, standing to hug her. "This place, it's home." "The desert knew you belonged," she said, her eyes crinkling. "We all did." Her words wrapped around me like a warm breeze, and I smiled, my heart full. I walked to the market, the dirt path crunching under my sandals, the air alive with the scent of chilies and mesquite. Javier was there, carving figurines, his nod quiet but kind. I opened my notebook, writing about the canyon, its lines like the stories I'd shaped. I thought of Mary, how we laughed and cried, rebuilding our bond as friends, not just memories. She'd left this morning, promising to visit again, and I'd felt peace, knowing I loved her without needing her to complete me. She'd called today, her voice warmer, and I'd told her about the desert, my pottery, my new home. Back at the adobe house, I sat on the patio, the desert silence vast, the air cooling with the scent of sage and earth. I opened my notebook and wrote about the canyon, its clarity like the Clara I'd found. I noted Rosa's words, Javier's nod, the bowl I'd left, each a stone in my foundation. Sagebrush wasn't a cure, but a canvas where I'd shaped a life, pottery, notes, friendships, a renewed bond with Mary. I thought of Daniel again, how he'd called my moments by the desert my spark tales. That spark was mine now, not in giving, but in living, in choosing myself. The stars came out bright against the dark, and I stayed on the patio, the blanket around my shoulders. I looked at the desert, its dunes endless, and felt whole, not perfect, but enough. To anyone listening, I'd say this: believe you're enough. Start over no matter your age. Share your story. Sagebrush taught me it's never too late to choose yourself, to find your light and shine. I was Clara, and I was home.